Hello and welcome to Why Wasn't It Better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Pross.
On this episode of Why Wasn't It Better? We're going way back to The Robe, a massive, prestigious Hollywood epic that is now mostly remembered as the first CinemaScope movie. Starring Richard Burton as a Roman tribune who wins Christ's robe at the crucifixion, the film aims for spiritual reckoning, historical spectacle, and solemn grandeur, and only occasionally pulls it off. It's sincere, expensive, earnest, and very much of its time. But there's a strange emotional distance at the end of it that keeps it from truly landing. Is it a forgotten classic, or is it just an important technical milestone wrapped around a surprisingly stiff story? Let's find out why The Robe wasn't better. And here to help us figure that out is a most welcome return guest, Nathan Perry.
Hey guys.
Nathan Perry.
Hey. Glad to be here. I'm glad to be talking about this interesting movie.
Yeah, it's been a minute since we've had you on, Nathan. How are you doing?
I'm doing. It's raining outside right now, so that's kind of fun.
In California?
Gives a cozy vibe. I know. In California, it does rain 3 times a year.
Well, if it rains, does that make for more extreme surfing?
It could.
I don't know.
It's very possible, Anton.
It's
possible.
I also live in California. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I know.
I have a question for you both.
Please.
What does Marcellus Gallio look like? Does he look like a bitch?
I don't think they said that word.
I don't think
1953.
I don't think
Okay.
that's
I'll cut that out. I'm sorry.
I need a clear description of what that
Please
means.
keep it in.
I really wanted, what's his name? Nero? No, not Nero.
Caligula.
Caligula.
What does Marcellus Gallio look like?
Does he look like a bitch?
Oh, sorry. I don't know why. Marcellus is not a character name you hear often anymore.
No.
I still hear Gene Simmons a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk about Gene Simmons, specifically the Gene Simmons that is in this film, which is confusing.
Yeah.
But not confusing at the time, I don't think.
No.
It's confusing to us now.
No, but
Certainly
bit
not
more.
confusing at
really,
the time.
really quick, Nathan. Been a while. Do you have any words you want to share with the audience? Anything you want to plug really quick?
Just, there's this great podcast you guys should listen to called Why Wasn't It Better? It's like really great, like movie reviews and like looking back on why did movies, kind of what was good about them, what wasn't good about them. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it.
Well, with a smile like that, I'm definitely going to listen to that podcast.
No, I'm just happy to be here with you guys. I got nothing other than just love and good vibes. Let's do it. And you need to get it off your chest.
I appreciate you plugging our own podcast. We can use all the promotion we can.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you. Anton, we're talking about The Robe today. As of this recording, this is the oldest film we've ever covered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
when
was
it was still 20th Century Fox. In the 20th century?
Yeah, in the 20th century.
What was the previous oldest one?
Dial M for Murder, which came out the year after this, 54. But I guess we're going to have to... Should we just stop saying that every time we cover the oldest film? It's probably getting boring for listeners.
Interesting.
I think it's fun. Like,
Okay.
What's the next oldest film? Animal Crackers?
No, that's not on the list. I never heard of that.
It's
The Robe was released on September 17th, 1953 by 20th Century Fox, which is now known as 20th Century Studios. It was directed by Henry Koster. The screenplay was written by Gina Kaus, Albert Maltz, and Philip Dunn, based on the novel by Lloyd C. Douglas, starring Richard Burton, Gene Simmons, who is a woman, not the lead singer of Kiss, Victor Mature, Michael Rennie, Jay Robinson, Dean Jagger, Torrin Thatcher, and Richard Boone. The budget was $4.1 million. That is $49 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was $36 million. That is $434 million adjusted for inflation. It sits at a 38% Rotten Tomatoes score. Not very good.
No.
What happened there? So in this biblical epic, a drunk and disillusioned Roman tribune named Marcellus Gallio, played by Richard Burton, wins Jesus' robe in a dice game after the crucifixion. Marcellus has never been a man of faith like his slave Demetrius, played by Victor Mature, But when Demetrius escapes with his robe, Marcellus experiences disturbing visions and feels guilty for his actions. Convinced that destroying the robe will cure him, Marcellus sets out to find Demetrius and discovers his Christian faith along the way. Nathan, as today's guest, why did you agree to appear on this episode and talk about the robe?
I was under duress, and I was...
You stood before Caligula himself.
Yes, and was told to either watch this film or die. And I said, how bad could it be? And I thought it wasn't that bad. No, I mean, I had never seen this, never even heard of this. When you reached out, Pat, and you're like, how do you want to watch 1953's The Robe? I was like, what is that? But I thought it sounded interesting in part because I personally have a big gap, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later because I know there's many movies in this space that may come up for points of comparison. I've never watched like a Hollywood epic, like biblical Roman epic movie of this kind at all. Big budget, big set, this type of thing. Cinema.
You've never seen Ben-Hur?
Nope.
Wow.
Nope.
Okay.
Never seen anything of this type or style. This might be the oldest movie I've ever seen. That's not true. I have seen like Citizen Kane, but outside that, I don't think
You've never seen like the original Oklahoma film adaptation?
No. I guess I did see, we watched some sort of 40s Christmas movie, like just post World War II Christmas movie, me and my wife. But other than that, we're getting off track. I haven't seen Ben-Hur. I haven't seen any of these types. So I was intrigued to be like, I've never seen this type of movie. I've heard about this type of movie. I have some thoughts about what those tropes going into it, and this movie definitely did fulfill many of those kind of tropes and styles and things, but I thought it'd just be interesting because I've, again, never watched this kind of movie before. So
this one's a real throwback. I mean, this is a true example of the golden era of Hollywood.
Right.
This was a time when the biblical sword and sandal type of epic was quite common. It dominated the box office for a period of time. This was the #1 movie of 1953.
Right.
Anton, this is sort of a Christian classic. I was aware of this film because I was brought up in a Christian household, and I think it was shown during a Sunday school thing. I don't think we watched the whole thing in Sunday school. That would have been tough.
A lot.
But I hadn't really ever seen this movie all the way through, at least not that I can remember. I thought it would be interesting to cover just because it was based on a best-selling novel written by a guy who at one point, Lloyd Douglas, was one of the most successful novelists in the United States. I think at one point during the 30s and 40s. Richard Burton is always worth talking about.
Was
that, Nathan?
Sorry to jump in. For the Lloyd Douglas thing, because again, not really familiar, had never really heard of him. Was he a popular novelist just for this book, or
a couple others? He was a former pastor.
Okay,
and he wrote a few other novels that I think a couple of them were turned into films. One of them is called The Big Fisherman, which is about Peter.
Okay, got it.
So he was a pretty successful author in his day. This was probably his most well-known novel. And everything about this, Anton, I think checks the boxes for why wasn't it better. It gets nominated for Best Picture. It's the biggest film of 1953. Critically, not that well received. All these years later, I think it's mostly forgotten. I'm sure like older folks will probably remember. Like my dad is very aware of this movie. But I don't think it's a classic at all in the way like Ben-Hur is, or the Ten Commandments, or Spartacus. Anything with Richard Burton I thought would be fun to cover too, just because of how great of an actor he was. Had you seen this, Anton?
So I had seen this film just because of a good old channel that I don't know if it still exists anymore, Turner Classic Film.
It does. It still exists.
I think that must be on like the 4th option package for all channels if someone still has cable. But yeah, I'd seen it a long time ago on Turner Classic Film just because was in the rotation of channels to check out and see classic films. And this particular film, it is grandiose, that's for sure. And that's what I remember from it. is just the costumes feeling very epic, just getting this feeling of nostalgia for a time that I never lived in, but reminds me of the golden age of Hollywood. So that's my relationship with this film.
So nothing too deep.
Nothing too deep. We dated in college.
This was successful enough that it got a sequel, which I mean, I wasn't even aware of. A hugely successful sequel called Demetrius and the Gladiators. It made $24 million the following year, which is a lot of money in today's money.
I think more people are actually familiar with the sequel.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
I don't believe you.
The only reason is because I discussed this with a handful of people and they actually recognize the sequel.
I'm shocked by that. I had never heard of the sequel.
But I wonder if it's just because, like, maybe it's like a preference thing. Like, people remember Rush Hour 2 before Rush Hour 1. I don't.
But you know Rush Hour 2 is a sequel.
Has to be, right?
Right? I don't know. Well, regardless, we can debate that when we covered Demetrius and the Gladiators. Also, by the way, Demetrius and the Gladiators, better title than The Robe.
Yeah, I think The Robe is a little...
Doesn't tell you much.
It doesn't really grab you.
No.
Well, I mean, what's another title that's kind of ambiguous? Spartacus?
Sounds more interesting to me than The Robe.
I don't think that's that ambiguous, but...
No.
Spartacus at least is a badass name. The Robe is like a bathrobe. What kind of robe? Like,
right. What's the context? I get
because you know, I mean, look, I think we can get into it later, but when we get into the theology of all this, the robe is not one of the most famous things about the crucifixion.
Sure, and I think the idea behind the Lloyd's, I read a little bit about kind of Lloyd's book. It was came from someone asking, "Hey, by the way, we don't have a lot of him. What do you think happened with his clothes?" And he just was like, "Well, I guess I'll make a story out of it."
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, to be fair, we could have a whole we could have a whole episode about what religious artifacts from the crucifixion end up in anime. I don't think that the robe is often mentioned. The spear of Longinus.
Underused. I mean, I'm thinking
All the
maybe
time.
the robe is underused. I think
Maybe-
that's a sign that this movie showed is like, why are we not having more films and television shows centered around Jesus's robe? I mean,
Because the spear sounds probably way cooler from the eyes of
that is
It
true.
does sound cooler. Like the Shroud of Turin sounds cooler.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Shards from the from the cross itself that you
Sure.
can use to become another being to defeat vampires, or is that from anime? Up
I
to you
think
to
that's
decide.
probably
Some
just from anime. I'm going to push the conversation forward. Here's a bit of trivia. According to Box Office Mojo, this is the 52nd highest grossing film of all time in North America, adjusted for inflation.
Pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean,
it doesn't sound that
all
impressive on
films?
paper. Then you think about all the films that have
Yeah,
come
it's-
out in the years
but-
since,
Yeah,
Wow.
that's pretty impressive for a film.
especially one that is this old.
Mm-hmm.
Anton, we can't talk about a movie without talking about the 6 Degrees of Warren Beatty's sex life, aka Warren Beatty's dick tracing.
Yeah.
Anton, this one's special. We have a direct connection.
Didn't
Gene
have to-
Simmons.
From Kiss.
Not from Kiss, no.
From
not
this movie.
Kiss. From this
From
movie.
this- from this film.
Gene
Gene
Simmons was
Simmons from-
romantically linked to Warren Beatty in the early 1960s. We don't even need any
1920.
degrees of separation here.
Nope. Just direct link.
Not even that far out from this movie, right?
No.
Warren
Years.
Beatty took Gene Simmons out for lunch, and then Gene Simmons was like, "I love rock and roll."
This may be a hot take. I don't like Kiss at all. Not a fan.
Gene Simmons.
The band, Kiss, Anton, the band. I don't like them. I'm not
This
a
is
fan.
You
This
just
is
don't like the music. It's
Don't
just,
like 'em.
It's not your thing. Okay.
This is not my
This is
thing.
immediately becoming a Laurel and Hardy bit. Gene Simmons from the band.
Yeah,
Okay.
not a fan.
All right. I mean, I can't even really recall. Give me a Kiss song to judge
Well,
the
she-
entire band based on it.
She said, "I love to rock and roll every night and party every day."
Okay, got it. That's okay. It's a 4 out of 5 song, but
It's
I don't know
fine.
if the whole band can rest upon one decent
I was made for
song.
loving you, baby. You were made for loving me.
They have a song called Lick It Up, which
Well,
sounds
that just
sexual.
makes sense. That
I'm sure
it's
Warren
not-
Beatty
sure,
appreciated
it sounds,
that.
There's no way that it has any sort of sexual connotation
That song's
whatsoever.
about pudding.
What kind of Warren Beatty joke can you make about that? Nathan, definitely read Warren Beatty's biography. It is a trip. I came away impressed and also disgusted.
Okay.
I'm probably more so on the disgusted route.
Yeah, I mean, it is disgusting, but I have to admire the commitment to his craft.
Gene
Right.
Simmons.
Yeah.
Kiss.
All
Kiss
right.
Pinball.
So
I
I
have
think
to
we're
edit
moving.
so much out of this episode.
So I think we're moving next into production history.
Yes, we
The
are.
Spear of Longinus and Neon Genesis Evangelion.
This film was adapted from a 1942 bestseller by Lloyd Douglas, like we mentioned, a minister turned novelist. Producer Frank Ross spent nearly a decade trying to bring the novel to the screen. He came close in 1943 at RKO, but the studio deemed the project too expensive, and eventually the rights ended up with 20th Century Fox. Bonus points if either of you can tell me who owned and ran RKO Studios in 1943.
Howard Hughes.
Yeah.
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 Oh.
Apparently one of the reasons wasn't just the money, but Howard Hughes is like, I don't do biblical stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Famously, yeah, it caved because he didn't know what he was doing.
Okay.
Until the recent DVD and Blu-ray versions, the film's co-screenwriter Albert Malta's credit was omitted as a lingering effect of the infamous Hollywood blacklist. And I think later on we can talk about there are some scenes in this movie that have been apparently influenced by the Red Scare that was taking place in the 1950s and the House of Un-American Activities. I don't know that you necessarily need to compare the two. This film could have just worked fine on its own. Regardless, wanted to point that out. This film is notable for being the first to use CinemaScope, an anamorphic filming process that uses specialized lenses to squeeze a wide image into 35 millimeter, which is then unsqueezed during projection for a panoramic 2:35:1 aspect ratio. It was one of Hollywood's attempts to get audiences away from their TV sets and back into theaters, because in the early 1950s, Hollywood had been, according to many Hollywood insiders, they had been losing ground in money to the recent onset of television permeating American households.
That is amazing. That is so cool. First time I've heard Animorphs outside of the 90s.
It's pretty crazy what they were able to achieve, Anton. It really is. Oddly, this film was not planned that way. After a week of shooting in the standard flat Academy aspect ratio of 1:37:1, the production was shut down, and when it resumed, principal photography started from scratch, shooting alternative takes in both CinemaScope and Academy format on the assumption that not all theaters booking the film would rush to equip themselves with expensive widescreens and stereophonic sound playback equipment, although the film was initially released in only CinemaScope. And until the home video era, a transfer from the flat negative was the only version to play on television. Now the CinemaScope version is the only available version. I guess you could compare that to like IMAX today. It sort of reminded me of that, like, well, we're filming some scenes in IMAX, some scenes in others. I don't know.
Interesting. So I'm curious if you found anything out, because this mentions like the assumption that not all theaters booking the film would have the equipment. So I wonder if eventually they did have to say, okay, you can only see it at CinemaScope theaters or something, if that was really kind of what happened, at least for a period of time.
No, I didn't Google that part.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just curious. Might be fun. I'll look at it.
For what it's worth, CinemaScope was an expensive gamble that Fox aggressively pushed. By the late 1960s, the brand name had disappeared, but anamorphic widescreen did not. It evolved into Panavision. It became the industry standard. I thought this was kind of cool to mention. Technically, the influence of CinemaScope is still around, because if a modern movie is shot in a 2:39:1 anamorphic, which is pretty common, it can trace its lineage back to CinemaScope.
Very famously, you see the CinemaScope overlay on the film La La Land.
That is pretty cool. And I think the main point I want to make about that is CinemaScope was a brand. It was not necessarily a format of filming. It was just a very well-known name brand at the time. But yeah, it's so did they shoot La La Land in CinemaScope, or did they just use the name?
In the ratio, like they used the name. I think there was something around the wording of how it was presented, but they wanted to include it because, of course, the film itself was inspired by that era.
Right.
Of like musicals. So Burt Lancaster originally was cast in the role played by Victor Mature, and Laurence Olivier and Tyrone Power were considered for Marcellus before the part went to 27-year-old Richard Burton. Burton was an atheist and did not care for the film's religious theme, and Burton initiated an affair with co-star Gene Simmons, shocking no one. Young Harry Shearer appears uncredited in the role of David, the disabled friend of Jonathan, the boy to whom Marcellus gives the donkey. Marilyn Monroe has an uncredited
That's
vocal
insane.
appearance. Yeah.
Harry Shearer. I was like, what?
Marilyn Monroe has an uncredited vocal appearance, according to the film's choral director, Ken Darby. When Marcellus returns to Rome from Jerusalem and he's talking Diana, they are interrupted by a slave girl saying to Marcellus, quote, "The emperor will see you at once," end quote. And that's at about the 52-minute mark. The girl who played the servant didn't show up that day, and Monroe, who was on the dubbing stage to do voiceovers for one of her films, said she could do it. The girl in the poster for this film is not Jean Simmons, but rather the original actress cast in the role of Diana, Jean Peters. She dropped out of the film because she was pregnant, but the face in the poster was left unchanged. The sequel was put into production before this film had been released, and this gamble paid off when the film became the highest grossing film of 1953. Wanted to note this was an extremely unusual thing for the era. This kind of thing is much more common now. And the film was first telecast on U.S. television on Easter weekend, 1968, on ABC. Nielsen ratings estimated that more than half of American homes with TV sets tuned in. Ratings like that is crazy. And that brings us to our promo break. As always, we thank you for listening. If you're liking the podcast and haven't already done so, please hit that follow or subscribe button. We encourage you to leave comments wherever you're listening or watching. You can follow us on the major social media platforms, Instagram, X, and best of all, Letterboxd, where you can see our full list of films that we intend to cover. And if you really like what we're doing and want to throw a few dollars our way, we do have a Patreon. There you can support the show, get access to episodes a full week early and ad-free, plus access to bonus content. Links to the aforementioned are in the description.
All right, let's talk Why Wasn't It Better?
What's reason number one, Pat?
Well, I'm going to just, sorry to interrupt, Pat. I'm very sorry. But
Oh, you have an update for us on CinemaScope?
Breaking news.
Breaking news. It does sound like there was a sort of technology push that Fox had to do post this movie to try to up the amount of theaters that could actually show. Obviously, big franchise theaters, right? Like the Roxy in New York and the Chinese theater in LA. Were ready right away. At least through some stuff I'm reading, is it took but within a year they had pushed out like 8,000 theaters in North America. So by 1954, they had 8,000 theaters equipped for CinemaScope or something like that. So I don't know what it was like before that point. Kind of wild. Kind of makes you think about, pause for just a second to interrupt, but I was listening to some discussions back on talking about when Star Wars Episode 1 came out and the push for digital because of George Lucas doing all this digital film, right? And how, hey, we have to push theaters to have the digital film projectors because that didn't exist before. So just made me think of that. Oh, you have to have theaters actually equipped with stuff. We don't think about that too much, other than your example with IMAX. So, okay. Breaking news over.
Love it. Love the breaking news. Well, let's talk Why Wasn't It Better? Context and legacy of this film. I mentioned earlier, or Anton, you mentioned, or someone mentioned how when this arrived in theaters, the industry was losing ground to television. There was a lot of pressure on the movie industry to give viewers something they couldn't get at home. This is the same reason why you saw that 3D movie craze happen in the early 50s. That's the explanation for you. Well, why did they suddenly start making these movies in 3D? Because television. And this reminds me of something Spielberg said years later, how when the industry feels threatened, they sort of trot out 3D. You saw this kind of resurgence in the 80s with the home video market, and the movie industry was like, what are we going to do? Let's do some 3D stuff. You saw this around, the late 2000s, around 2009, when streaming video was just kind of starting. They're like, let's bring in some 3D stuff. And I think, this film is obviously not 3D, but I guess if we were movie buffs in 1953, CinemaScope would have been a big deal.
Not gimmicky.
No, I mean, knowing all the stuff we just read and talked about with it, no, I don't think it's gimmicky. I actually think it's a pretty cool thing that Fox pushed for it, and it ended up sticking around just without the name.
Yeah, it is interesting that I think it's, I don't know about you guys, but when I watched it, just because, again, I also have a lack of familiarity with watching a lot of, 50s, but it's so big. All these huge shots pulled out so much. Also starts to show quite a bit, especially if you're watching these days in terms of like, the set, the backdrops, right? These types of things that I was definitely, a couple of them had a feeling, this was kind of a weird thing, a feeling almost of like early CGI movies, where I had this sense of like, you can see the physical set up front, and then in this case it was the backdrop, right? Because you have all the matte paintings, like a huge one. One that stood out the most to me was the crucifixion scene, because the matte painting basically covers the whole, there's no set back, like there's no physical setback, it's just the whole matte painting, and just really kind of, because they had these huge wide shots, just had such a and you could clearly see them flexing, right? We have this big widescreen film that we can do now, and we want to do big shots, right? We want to do big, wide, cover as much as we can. So I thought it's also them trying to learn and see what works early on as well, that I just thought was super interesting to see from what they're trying and what they're using. So
I know what you mean about the matte paintings. I think there were some shots I thought it looked really good, like when they're approaching Jerusalem.
Exactly.
That looked good, like real good.
That's where I wasn't sure, is there other stuff, what is matte paint? Because some of it just had such a different feel, and it could be there's other things that even I'm not sure of why. But like the one was approaching Jerusalem looked really good. The crucifixion on the what is the hill top?
Calgary,
like,
or Golgotha
felt very much like, because you're looking on this kind of shot down onto Jerusalem, if you remember, where it's supposed to be night, or because it's dark, right? It's dark. It's supposed to be middle of the day, but it's dark, and
basically an eclipse.
That one felt very like, I can tell that it's a matte painting in the back, and it feels all kind of disconnect. You can kind of see where it runs up against the set. But I thought that was just interesting, them trying things out, and, also a different era, I think, where even big budget films could have some more of the seams. You can see more of the seams of the things connected, rather than our modern era of film where it's pretty rare to see kind of the seams unless you know where to look for it. So
unless the CGI is very obvious. I was reading more about the production of this, and I came away impressed a little bit. We can talk about it now. I haven't mentioned later in the notes, I think, but there's almost 50 matte paintings used in this film that they were using to extend a lot of sets. So I think a lot of it looks pretty good.
Yeah. There's a really famous behind the scenes photo. You can see it during the crucifixion scene on set, where the matte painting, it's not just like one matte painting, right? Like if you look behind the studio, behind each actor, the studio wall, literally from like floor to ceiling, is matte painting, and it just completely covers the studio.
Yeah, I know what one you're talking about, Anton. But there's even stuff very, very early on in the film, in the opening minutes, when Marcellus is in the slave market. There's a couple matte paintings used to extend the set of like just like that, like it looks really good, because they have, I think to your point, Nathan, the shots themselves are wide and vast, and they have the scope, and they also have a ton of extras, which always helps sell it. Hundreds of extras in all these shots.
So, and that's also one, if I'm really trying to dissect, I think the Calvary one has less people, so you hide it less. Anyway, well, it's...
no, that's a good point, because, there's probably maybe 24 people on Calvary in the movie.
Yeah, versus the slave market or the ending scene.
Hundreds.
They just dump a bunch of people into it, for sure.
Anton, I do want to shout out the director, Henry Koster. Anytime we cover one of these older films, unless it's a name we recognize today, I always try to look into what kind of work that they did. He was extremely prolific. He started off as a screenwriter, and then he moved into the directing in the 30s. And he basically worked on films every year until he retired in 1966. A lot of stuff that I haven't heard of, but some stuff that I have. He directed the James Stewart film Harvey, with like the big rabbit. Not making that up. That's a real plot to a movie. And then, have you ever seen The Bishop's Wife, the Christmas movie with Cary Grant? where
That's
he
a
plays
really
the
famous.
angel.
Yep, it's a really
Yeah.
famous one. Yeah.
Henry Coster directed that. David Niven's in that film as well. So he was just more or less seen by Fox and the other studios as, which is still common today, a very steady hand that we can give a film to. It'll come in on time, on budget. We know exactly what we're getting from this director.
Yeah, because he worked across different studios, right? Whether it was MGM,
Yeah.
Fox. Yeah.
You know, we always talk about like the auteurs on this podcast, right? Like the Spielbergs, the Tarantinos, but there are plenty of great directors who aren't auteurs who work on projects that are just basically given to them and who turn out consistently great work.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting because I was just curious about that and just peeked at the sequel, which is at least listed as being directed by someone else. But I know they were supposed to be filmed at the same time. That's kind of just interesting.
I also looked into that, Nathan. I was curious about that too. I couldn't find a real reason for it other than I think maybe logically they started filming the sequel while this was still being filmed. So I guess they just wanted, just for time's sake, they just hired somebody else to do it. I guess I'm not really sure.
Okay, interesting. Yeah,
but I think kind of like Anton pointed out, that was almost unheard of back then. Starting production on a sequel before the original film had even been released. That's pretty common now with some franchises, right? I mean, Marvel does this, of course.
They just did it with Dune.
Right. You certainly get stuff like that gets filmed back to back, like Back to the Future 2 and 3, The Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. It's definitely more common in the modern era, but in the 50s, unheard of.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason is just process. It was just it was way more time consuming in the 1950s. A lot of that a lot of less, not as scaled out as you get nowadays, right?
Right.
And then that's also just part of the cost involved.
Yeah, and you know, sequels just weren't that much of a thing back then. There of course were sequels, but the concept of a modern sequel is so different now than it was back then. They weren't thinking about franchises.
Sure. Well, they had only been having maybe, however many two real decades of consistent film by this point, realistically, like mass film consumption.
Yeah, good. I was gonna say good call. Film was still pretty early in its heyday.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of do people even want a sequel? Like maybe not.
Imagine
I don't know.
the studio exec. What is a sequel?
You want to make a continuation? Well, I'm really curious to watch this sequel now because the main character of this film dies at the end, and you're losing the biggest personality in Richard Burton, and you're kind of handing things off to Victor Mature, who I'm sure was a bigger name then, but I'm very curious to watch the sequel to this now. Maybe we'll do it next year, Anton.
Maybe.
If Nathan wants to come back for Demetrius and the Gladiators.
Might be able to get me there. Okay. We got to do the follow-ups, right?
Yeah, we do.
All right. Cool.
Anton, did this remind you of Ben-Hur?
Yeah, I see a lot of similarities visually, absolutely. Yeah. And then the scale of it, and I'm sure that's what a lot of this invokes.
The scale of it for sure, and also specifically how they treat Jesus in this film. I wonder if now this might have been more common then. I'm hardly an expert on biblical epics of the 50s, but Ben-Hur did a very similar thing where they don't show Jesus directly on screen. They don't show his face. You do hear his voice in this film, but it's like done in a kind of a strange way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good call out. I didn't give it too much thought other than it was just trying to avoid, I think, trying to avoid getting pegged as a religious film while still having the religious overtones, because they definitely weren't undertones.
Yeah, I don't know if you can really get away with this not being a religious film, but I'm at least just taking a quick glance because I know Ben-Hur's like a book, right? So not just a movie, and even had a movie before the 59 one. And it looks like that is kind of the vibe of that book as well, is sort of things and characters pinging off of things happening around Jesus, but not necessarily there in the scenes, right? A lot more of that kind of like, hey, I happen to be, I ran into the three magi or something on their way to baby Jesus or something like that, versus a lot like this movie. So it could be actually that Lloyd is pulling a lot more from Ben-Hur writing the Robe. I'm just a thought. Maybe that's like trying to follow that kind of history. So, but I like it. I like it doing it that rather than like, oh, here's all the scenes with Jesus, right? I think it makes, kind of a lot of the characters very interesting, right? In terms of, how are they responding to, in case many of them, a person they never met, right?
Yes, great point. So this ended up, although not a lot of people have heard of this movie today, I would bet. Although I assume our audience would have, Anton. We have a little bit of an older audience. I'm assuming, film buffs know The Robe. Keith Phipps of the Reveal Substack wrote, quote, biblical and biblical adjacent epics were hardly new to moviegoers in 1953, but The Robe offered a blueprint for a new era. The old mix still worked. You could get away with a lot of sex and violence so long as it was packaged piously. But the new widescreen process, CinemaScope, and the competitors that followed could have been designed specifically to immerse viewers in the past like never before. The Robe produced an immediate sequel in the form of Demetrius and the Gladiators, in which both Mature and Robinson reprised their roles. But its real legacy is the way that it blew the door open for the widescreen epics that followed, from the Ten Commandments to Ben-Hur to Spartacus, to say nothing of countless lower-budget sword and sandals movies, end quote.
What an era.
Yeah, this is just an era. I mean, this was what really dominated the box office, along with the Western. Just totally different than now.
Not a superhero in sight.
No.
When was the early Superman?
1978. I mean, there was, correct me if I'm wrong, Anton, there was some low-budget Superman stuff in like the 40s.
There was, because of course, the very famously George Reeves played Superman at the time. Right. But I mean, it makes sense. There's a lot of romanticization of Westerns in the Western era, and the popularity that comes with that as part of like the American culture and history. The sword and sandals aspect, I think it's just also absolutely fascinating. It's romanticized in such a way, but also so iconic for, like, I think all of these golden age era actors having to cement themselves in history being in these films. Like, you can't not, I think, like, you can't be a name in Hollywood if you haven't done like a big epic film like this at the time.
Yeah, I know. And I know part of the issue is they became very cost prohibitive. Like, the budget for this, what is it, $49 million in today's money? I mean, it wasn't low budget, but that's not crazy like what would happen with Cleopatra and some of that other stuff, like the fall of the Roman Empire in the 60s. But the Christian biblical epic has completely fallen by the wayside. We don't see much of this anymore. The last one I can really remember was about 10 years ago. You had Darren Aronofsky's Noah, and then Ridley Scott made that movie Exodus, Gods and Kings.
I don't even think that the next, or the Passion sequel, is going to be necessarily a biblical epic, but
it's coming out, right?
Yeah, it's coming out. It's fully funded.
Yeah, Mel Gibson's got the money together. Bless his heart.
I know one thing that actually, speaking of movies of this type, that made me think of, I know there was like and I've never seen it, and it's probably not that big of a movie, was Risen, which it made me think of this, because it's about like a Roman soldier who like is following up on the tomb being empty type of thing. I don't know really how deep it gets.
I know what you're talking about. I don't think it was a big budget movie.
No, it wasn't a big budget movie, right? No. I don't think by comparison, but it did make me think like a biblical drama. Certainly not a headliner film, though. Right. I don't think you're seeing a whole lot of that outside of maybe potentially the Passion follow-up, which I think will feel probably like a different movie.
Right, and it of course, just like way back when, Nathan, when we talked about the Passion of the Christ with you on, that was self-funded by Mel Gibson. That wasn't financed by any major studio. Sure. No studio would do this now. There's no way.
No, I don't think so.
Not a major studio.
No. I do want to point out, if you happen upon the Blu-ray for this film, Martin Scorsese gives it a very, very lovely introduction. He has a lot of fondness for this movie. Yeah, he's such a champion of this era of Hollywood too, and he's a Catholic.
No, I would say knows his roots. I'll say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Knows his roots, isn't afraid to mess with them a little bit by directing The Last Temptation of Christ,
Yeah.
which is a very controversial movie, especially with the Catholic Church. Although, I mean, I wouldn't call this film in any way Catholic, right, Anton? Like, there's nothing
No,
specifically Catholic about this film.
I mean, the only thing I would necessarily say is very especially Catholic about it is the importance of religious artifacts, which I think is also found in other practices, right? Just
yes.
yeah.
But Catholicism in general, I mean, you're right. Like, it places much more of an emphasis on artifacts and like what do they call it officially? Iconography.
Yeah, like the Spear of Longinus. I joked about it earlier being an anime, but yep,
it's a real thing.
Is one
reason. But
yeah,
I think but
the
I
Holy
think
Nails,
Mhm.
Shroud of Turin.
Right, but I think compared to when we talked about, say, Passion, which had all of this very specific Catholic iconography and like, oh, the Madonna or whatever, and like literally taking famous images and replaying them and remixing them, we don't have any of that here, really, right?
No. I mean, this film, we do see a brief glimpse of the Passion of the Christ, but not like the actual movie, The Passion of the Christ, really goes through what we would call today the Stations of the Cross, which is a very, very Catholic interpretation.
Yeah, exactly.
And we do see the true cross, or at least depicted.
We do? Yes.
The same true cross that was used in the anime Hellsing to fight vampires.
You on a big anime kick lately?
What
Patrick, you a fan of Trigun?
I've seen it.
A big anime kick? This sounds like standard Anton. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, he doesn't always mention anime this prolifically on a podcast recording.
I mean, it's just there's so many. I love the fascination of religious artifacts being in anime, just because a lot of writers in anime are like, well, this would look cool or this could be cool. No idea of the actual religious observance or reverence. It's just they could look really cool in the costumes in anime.
Well, could flip that on its head for Western audiences mixing Eastern stuff too. But what if instead we talked about the production of The Robe?
You could be another host, Nathan. I gotta say, CinemaScope looks great. This is a beautifully filmed movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's really just so colorful, just really popped in all sorts. I mean, the opening slave scene really just like the slave market scene just instantly, I think, pulls you in terms of like, just look how big this is. Look how wide this is. Look at all the colors. Look at all the costumes and all this stuff. Really great.
There's a number of scenes like that, you're right, where they're really taking advantage of the production design. That one, the slave market sequence for sure was very colorful. The other one that stood out to me, there's a few that did, but the sequence where Demetrius is running around Jerusalem, essentially he's trying to find Jesus to warn him that the Romans are, looking for him. And I don't know how big the set was that they built, but it looks massive. The way they're taking advantage of all the dimensions of the set, you see him running in different directions. He's knocking on doors. He's trying to talk to people at windows. I don't know if that was like specifically built and filmed with CinemaScope in mind, but that one really stood out to me where I was just really impressed by it, especially for an older film like this, where you can really tell they were putting a lot of time and effort and money into it.
Definitely.
And the horse chase towards the end.
Oh, yeah. I think, that scene, I thought the ending sequence as well, I think was just cool for just to kind of how big the set was and just kind of what they were building out.
Were they like escaping from the palace and everything?
But even just the final courtroom, like the Emperor's courtroom sequence, I just thought is cool, like just how wide it is in terms of everything it's showing off. I mean, one thing I'll highlight that I just thought was really neat was I liked all of the sort of more upscale Roman, like especially his like family's estate, like just how ornate and stuff, like the interiors were in terms of these sets. And clearly from our, we feel so different in terms of, say, maybe the lighting. Oh, it's very bright compared to, we would think moody or low
Right.
light or something. I'm contrasting in my head a lot, like especially in the very Roman parts, like Gladiator or something like that. Very different kind of visually. But I just think it's really cool with the bright, shiny kind of Roman architectural like makeup. I just thought it was really cool, like not something I'm seeing in film and TV really. So, and I thought it looked really good, right? Very colorful, very detailed.
Yeah. Fun fact just around the coloring. For this film, they actually went with a single strip process versus the Technicolor, what is it, 3-strip. So it was actually, it reduced saturation of the colors, made it a lot, like it was cheaper, but there was a lot of commentary that the color actually came off bland at the time. But I think it ended up,
Really?
yeah, but I feel like it actually ended up in the film's favor just because while more muted color, like more, the notes are flesh tones, are more well look a bit more saturated in the film. Other colors pop so much more vividly.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. Yeah, I guess so. It is funny. They were trying to save money in certain areas. You made a really good point, Nathan, that the lighting, of course, looks very much like an older film where everything's like very clearly lit with like the bright stage lights. But to your point, the production design is so outstanding. None of the sets looks cheap to me. Like there was so much detail on screen that I didn't mind the lighting just because of everything that was on display.
Yeah, other than the kind of one or two cases I highlighted of like, oh, that's really feeling like a matte painting there. I mean, I thought all of the actual stage production looked great. I mean, this won Best Costumes or something like that.
And Art Direction. It won 2 Oscars.
So that looks... surprised that worked really well for the movie. Like was art direction and the costumes, which looked great on the sets and stuff like that. So it's just funny to even talk about a movie with big sets. I don't know.
I mean, it's so rare now.
Yeah.
Anton, so it won 2 Oscars. Kind of amazed it didn't win for cinematography, though, considering how important the CinemaScope process was.
Sure, and also big thing is the politics of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see who won.
Newcomer on the block. Don't want to necessarily put too much power in CinemaScope.
From Here to Eternity, did that win? That was the big winner this year.
Cinematography, I'm looking, 1953. I'm just making sure it's 1953's Academy Awards. Best cinematography, they black and white and color.
They
separate
did.
Categories.
They had
separate
2
categories.
separate categories. Yeah.
Black and white, The Bad and the Beautiful, and color, The Quiet Man. There you
I think you might need the next year.
Oh, you think so? Okay.
Yeah, because these awards would have been presented in 54.
Well, that's where I was trying to confirm. I wanted to make sure. No, this makes sense. Black and white. Okay, you're right. 54. Black and white is From Here to Eternity.
Okay.
And color is Shane.
All right.
So this is the category that the Robe was nominated for, but lost to Shane, a film.
Great movie. Oh, classic Western.
Mm-hmm. All right.
What did you both think of the score?
Nathan, as our guest.
It was there. Like, I know.
Okay.
That was
So
fine.
not much. Okay.
At no point, the score, fine. There were a couple moments of sound direction. Once or twice we got the kind of tropey thunderclap stinger on like, my name is Judas. That I'm just like, okay, all right, cool. All right, it is 1953. Score? I cannot remember anything from watching it, so
I think
nothing bad, nothing good. It was there.
Emotionally, I think it did a bit more for me.
Okay.
I feel like for classic films in this era, like especially with one with so much biblical weight, I definitely feel like it matched the tone really well.
I agree with you, Anton. I liked it. I thought it was quite haunting in some scenes, particularly the scenes where I guess Alfred Newman, the composer, was trying to insert some kind of like heavenly choral music. I thought it was pretty effective. Surprised it wasn't nominated for an Oscar. We talked about him briefly, Anton, when we covered Airport way back in the day. And of course, Alfred Newman, for some context, Nathan, he is basically the head of this American composer dynasty. He is Randy Newman's uncle. He is Thomas Newman's grandfather.
I just confirmed that myself on the
Paul Newman, no relation.
No relation. Anton, basically the John Williams of his era. Do you guess how many Oscar nominations he has?
14.
No, not even close.
Oh.
Think John Williams numbers.
I have the
23?
number right here.
Not even close.
Not even close.
No way. All right.
It's
what is it?
45.
And that is intense.
I told you, John Williams. What does John Williams have? Like 50 something Oscar nominations at this point.
That's a lot. Yeah, the man has a lot.
Yeah. So Alfred Newman, he worked, but yeah, no, I did enjoy the score because I think what you were saying earlier, Nathan, is I mostly agree with. A lot of scores from this era of film are, I wouldn't call them bad, but they're a little dated. But I thought this one was pretty effective. There's also a lot of like details in this I think you can attribute to the screenplay. Watching this in like a moviegoer lens and then trying to watch this in a Christian lens, I was trying to do both at the same time. I thought because the scene with Pontius Pilate, it made me perk up immediately because he's only in the one scene.
Sure, it's good.
And I did like the detail where he asks to wash his hands and the slave tells him, "You already washed your hands," and he's like, "So I did." I thought that was a really, really good detail. Where the actor who plays him is named Richard Boone. He's definitely been in some other stuff. I thought it was a little weird to hear a stereotypically American actor playing Pilate, but I do like the scene where he's just telling Marcellus, like, "I've had a terrible night. My wife got involved," and you're just wondering about all the other context that this film could have shown, but doesn't. I think wisely doesn't.
Yeah, that's to its credit. I don't need a retelling of the Passion story. I like how it's interspersing and you have to kind of, I'm not saying it takes a lot of steps, but like when he's throwing money around, we have, earlier in the movie when they're like, well, there's other avenues, how much money you got in that purse or something like that. And they say like 8 gold pieces and 30 pieces of silver or something. And you're like, oh,
yeah.
Ooh, that's a reference.
We'll talk about that a little bit later, though. I have thoughts on that.
But it's like, I think it's fun in that way, right? And I'm glad it doesn't get that much deeper than that, right? Or that much more close than that. So,
all right, the cast. That's our next reason why this wasn't better. Despite hating making this, I do think Richard Burton is very good here.
This was still in his prime, Richard Burton, which is nice to see.
The beginning of his prime. This is one of his first Hollywood movies.
Yeah. And I feel like visibly he looks like it.
I mean, we were joking about this earlier. He's 27. He looks 40. He still looks good, obviously.
Yeah, but he didn't look. I mean,
we've
covered Richard Burton quite a bit on the show.
Yes.
Much respect for the man.
Love Richard Burton. He was amazed to receive an Oscar nomination for this. He apparently, critics called his performance wooden. I think he's good.
I wouldn't necessarily call it wooden. I think that he played the role like I would expect Richard Burton to play it. Very big, very, very emotional. Knew when to throw up the theatrics when he needed to. I thought he played it very strong.
Sure. I think that's kind of, for me, what I would say stood out is I could see wooden because I think there's a lot of moments and segments where he's there isn't a lot of energy, but I think the times where he brings it, it's good. Like the slave auction at the beginning, he's just kind of there all of a sudden. And then he's going to bid on this guy just to stick it to Caligula. But once he does, you're like, oh, he's selling the anger and frustration and pettiness of his actions and activities. So I think, and that happens throughout the film, even as the character changes tonally. I thought it was pretty good.
He has such a good arc, his character.
That helps a lot too.
You can't help but be invested.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there's definitely, we didn't talk too much about the specific pacing of the film. I do think there is a timing gap of right after maybe his conversion and involvement in the nascent Christianity to boom a year later and we're doing all this stuff where it's like, well, we just moved along to it happening. That's cool. That is
it's a really good point you bring up. And that's something I don't think the film does well. It's like, does this film take place over years? Because it would have been years, right?
It definitely would have been, but they definitely are happy to have a scene happen and be like, I haven't heard from him for a year, and it's very unclear, like, oh, they're in Rome now, and I'm like, you have Peter and like all these guys in Rome, like
that's quite a journey from
yesterday
Palestine by ship.
That's not adding up distance wise.
Which is like where I do think I actually thought for the early part of the film it was going and moving in a way that feels good, right? And then I think some of that later started to just sort of be like, well, shoot, we do actually need to fit the rest of the story into the last 40 minutes. We're just going to have to make it happen, which is, not a casting problem, not a production problem, but is a little bit of a, all right, we're making it happen.
So the love interest, Gene Simmons. Make your jokes again, Anton. You're on mute.
She was okay. She was all right.
She doesn't have a ton
Such a
to
long
do.
career.
Yeah, she's fine.
I wish that, peeking even at your notes, I'll steal your note. It would be nice if her wanting to be married was better than just a childhood or could be sold in a way that's better than just a childhood promise story kind of thing. It's just like, it's there, but I guess, and literally, if that's the thing that you can make that happen if you tell it 2/3 of the way through the story as, why is this girl so invested with this guy? But when you make it the first words out of her mouth at the very first scene, you're like, all right, girl.
Yeah, you're
chill.
Like halfway through the film when he comes back, and then remember she finds out he's been in Rome for a while and he hasn't told her that he's back, and it's like, why are you still into this guy?
Yeah, he's like into you, but I guess also maybe not,
Well, yeah, he like very clearly he's like, wow, she's hot. I should marry her. Like,
she didn't have anything else going on at the time, so she's like, okay.
Well, she could have married Caligula.
She made very strong, apparently strong, decisions to be like, oh, I'm sorry, Caligula, I'm sick. Right. Then over there, I can't.
Just remember, this is before Caligula went crazy.
Sure.
You want to talk about Caligula now?
Wait, the film?
Or does he steal? No, not the film.
Caligula.
Should we cover the film Caligula, Anton?
That's very...
I don't want to. I really don't.
That's very extreme.
You don't have to.
No, I don't think we should. Does Jay Robinson steal the film?
Absolutely over the top.
Insane.
Yeah.
I can't decide if it's a good performance or not. I don't know. It's
a memorable one.
It is definitely memorable.
It's definitely got a style. And I know I mentioned this, I think maybe before we started recording, but since you threw out Richard Burton being 23 at this, I'm amazed that Richard Burton being 27, Jay Robinson being 23, and this his first movie is just wild.
Does not look like
wild
a 23-year-old.
Crazy.
I think it is a successful performance because you're supposed to hate him, and you do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it does exactly what you need, but I also am never even though it's over the top, it never gets too, there's just enough of it that I'm not over it by the end of the movie or something. You could imagine that character being like so much, you're just like, okay, guy, all right.
Right.
Whatever.
This builds that Roman emperor trope, right?
Yeah, for sure. Right.
I mean, and if you know anything about the historical Caligula, he apparently was like this from what we know. He was assassinated by his own bodyguards, and you can totally believe
he's
that
based on history. Yeah.
Speaking not of actual Caligula, but this performance, I know it's a Roman emperor trope that then is, I'm sure, replayed however many times across however many films. But I do, again, just kind of think of Joaquin Phoenix and Gladiator, and just think of it like in the line of in vein of this. And that's where I'm actually would be interested to see the sequel, because I know he's still in it.
Yes.
And that's a Gladiator fight one that makes me actually even more think of like watching it in comparison to Gladiator or something like that, of like how much is that being something pulled for it.
So definitely check out the episode of Star Trek TOS that Jay Robinson is in. He's basically playing the same role that he is in this film. He plays a green alien. Anton, you've seen this episode, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're a Trek fan or not, Nathan, but
I'm a bit more of a TNG and post TNG guy. I've never been a huge TOS, but there's always room for me to grow.
His
as
episode
a person.
is worth a watch, just because of like if now that you've appreciated him in this film, changing the batteries on your mouse there.
Yes, we're good.
I wasn't sure what you were doing. It's like, is he putting bullets in a gun?
He's like, you
gotta keep something. Yes.
I guess he should have been nominated for an Oscar, Anton.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this is where those tropes are built from and done really well.
So I was talking to my dad about this film the other day. Victor Mature was like a huge deal back then. Talk about lost to time. I don't think anyone recognizes his name anymore.
Makes sense to push him for the sequel.
Yeah. I do like him in this. Demetrius is probably the most interesting character in the film because, of course, he gets bought. He's this slave who gets bought, but then he doesn't want to leave after he's offered his freedom by Marcellus. He immediately becomes, I guess, what you would call an early Christian. He's immediately converted when he sees Jesus, right? He's just struck by merely making eye contact with him. And I can see why they based the sequel around him, for sure.
Makes me curious if that was already what the book novel kind of had going on or not. I really have no idea.
I haven't read the novel, but based on the synopsis that I've read, more or less, yes. Because the sequel, the film, is still based on this book. I guess it just took elements from this book. I don't think there was an actual sequel book called Demetrius and the Gladiator.
Got it.
St. Peter's in this film, Anton. I have some questions about this part, though. I think this is where I would have... I think the film is a little disappointing here, because when Peter pops up as a character, I got really interested. I think the actor's fine. His name's Michael Rennie. He does a fine job. But in addition to having a very fake-looking beard, which looked like felt glued onto his face...
Looked very, very fake, yes.
It did. It's like, because the most interesting part of this film to me is seeing what would have been the early Christians in the Roman Empire right now. I mean, at this point, I don't even think they were called Christians. They would have just probably still been calling themselves Jews, right?
Yeah.
And of course, scripture mentions that they were first called Christians in Antioch. But again, we don't really know when exactly this film story ends. It's presumably several years after the crucifixion. But they're really playing it loose with the timeline.
Sure.
And the thing that I thought was disappointing, where it was a missed opportunity for this story, is Peter is basically seen traveling solo, and in reality, he would have been traveling with a bunch of the other apostles. And I just felt I was surprised that the film didn't feature them as characters, because it would have been like this great opportunity to show Peter and a number of the other apostles like starting their ministries in other locations.
I'm curious, at least just kind of poking around, I'm curious if that's sort of an artifact of the book.
I think so.
And the way that the book is written, and the book has like a follow-up sequel called The Big Fisherman, so it's very much specifically a Simon Peter centric, like,
yes,
hey, we're doing Peter time here, right? Which is whatever. Oh, that's cool. I'm not saying that's bad, but it just seems like it's... I could also see this movie has enough stuff going on. I don't know if we need a lot of other apostles pinging around, even if it would be nice to kind of have the cameo.
It'd be a nice cameo, really builds out the
I know
cinematic universe.
Yeah, it would start... don't get me wrong, you need to introduce them all to start building out the cinematic universe, so you can have your Paul spinoff, you can have your whatever spinoff. It makes sense. But again, as we talked earlier, they hadn't yet figured out that they needed to launch the cinematic universe out of this film. It's only the 50s. So I know we talked a little bit about cast. One that I actually wanted to kind of shout out a little bit, if we're done talking about Peter and that part.
Yeah.
I really liked the Centurion guy. And he was only in like 2 or 3... Paulus. I really liked... I looked it up, this guy, Jeff Morrow. I really liked all the scenes he was in. I just thought he was kind of like just did a really good job of being that guy, right? You know, I thought the whole like when Marcellus calls him out to duel, he's like, "When I beat you, I want you to like, so all your men will leave if I beat you," and he's like, "I'll be dead." So you know, it's funny. That's not how it ends up, but I just thought he was a funny guy, like funny in the sense of like I liked that performance.
I agree. Great character.
Yeah.
I love their duel, and he, you know, Marcellus spares him at the end, and it's a fitting fate for his character because you know from the previous established scenes he's not a bad guy. He's just kind of doing a job.
Yeah, he kind of just assumes, and he knows this is a bad assignment, that this is like, he's probably going to end up dead, or you show up here, you got to be a big screw up or failure, or like, this place sucks, and you're probably going to die at any moment. So there's also a surprising thing of like, whoa, grace or something? I don't know. Maybe they need to do a spin-off movie of him, right?
They definitely could have. I don't know. Pretty interesting.
Again, if this was being made in 2026, we'd already be 7 movies and 3 TV shows lined up. Or maybe the opposite, actually. We do a lot more TV shows these days.
Yeah, more series, probably direct to streaming, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if this was another thing that was taken from the book, but one of the things that really stood out to me is that the story heavily implies that it is Pilate who has Jesus arrested, which is, of course, not at all what happens historically in Scripture. It's the Sanhedrin who have him arrested and later turn him over to Pilate. So I found it interesting that they're making Marcellus's character, and obviously he has to carry out the execution of Jesus, but they're making him complicit in his arrest as well because they used the money from his purse to bribe Judas. It really stood out to me. It's like, did you have to go that far?
I mean, you're certainly right that it's definitely like feels a little like different, right? And you know, maybe it's for the movie, I think it's okay, right? It's just trying to be, I think, sort of trying to do that. Let's try to interject in a bunch of different ways this story aligning, right? And maybe that's playing a little too much to it, of like, oh, we got to find all the ways to have the passion story intersect with this one. But I mean, like, is it correct? Probably not. But I think it works just fine for the context of what the movie is doing. So
yeah, from a screenplay standpoint, it just goes direct to the point, and then still serves the purpose of the character in the movie, right? But historically accurate is not.
It is not.
Well, I don't think anyone's arguing whether that this is a very historically accurate film. So,
well, I just think it's interesting how it's a historical fiction story, but they're changing stuff to suit the story, and I'm not quite sure why.
It could be like just for it's fun to have all of these things pinging and intersecting with each other. Is it necessary? Probably not, but maybe someone was just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if they paid off Judas and then he ran into Judas later and
He's like, hey, what's your name? Judas.
Hey, I mean, frankly, I think we see that even with modern big budget, you know, filmmaking. It's just like, do we need to have all of these, you know, whenever they do a remake or a reboot or whatever, do we really need to have every single, or like a, you know, remake that's actually a sequel type of thing? Do we need to really have every single piece lined up together? It seems like there's a compulsion to make it so everything has to be related. So there's something more about modern filmmaking here.
Maybe.
All right.
Obviously, this is compressing a lot of the persecution of Christians, which took place over hundreds of years into, you know, it looks like a few years in this film. You know, Caligula did not really persecute Christians. That didn't begin until under Nero.
Sure. Nor is it really a clear sense of persecution per se, or just like, oh, we've got these guys that we don't like showing up. Like, is it large scale? Is it just like, oh, we got these like separatists that we need to, you know, kind of.
I mean, the only scene that I think really like gets into that is where one of the most interesting scenes in the film, I think, where Marcellus meets Tiberius, the emperor. And he's like, I want you to put together a list of all the names, write down all the people who are involved in this. And that's where I mentioned this way earlier, that the communism connection that maybe this film
very-
was trying to make.
Very HUAC.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah. So I don't know. Make of that what you will.
I also liked that scene. And for whatever reason, what went through my head during that scene was also Dune Part 2. And
Yeah.
I don't know why. I was just thinking about it like, okay, aged emperor
Good.
doing the thing.
Christopher
Okay.
Walken.
Christopher Walken. What we needed is, I was actually more like thinking the guy in the robe, like, what if we had this guy instead of Christopher Walken at the end of in Dune 2?
I don't know who the actor was, but I liked him.
Yeah.
Tiberius. I kind of liked how he was mocking the pagan religion stuff too. Did you notice this? How his like advisors were like, yeah, I saw this coming in like the entrails of an owl. And he's like, oh, the entrails of an owl. Cool.
Yeah, no, I thought he had
That
a
was
great
good.
scene
Yeah.
for just like the one scene he was in, because it was just the one.
Yeah, just a
Thought it was
cameo. It
good,
was
yeah.
like
Yeah.
not even maybe 5 minutes. It was real good.
Do you think that there was enough? I mean, especially the ending is very telling. I think this one is probably more so put in the history books as like a strong film for a strong in Christian film history.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I like I was saying just a little while ago. I wish they had been a bit more historically accurate to like what's actually in scripture. Now, obviously, I understand they were adapting this novel,
Mhm.
but I can see why this is well regarded in certain Christian societies. I just like I said, I don't know now if it is anymore at this point, but I can see why this was like revered for years. I can see why.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly there's nothing here that I would think is controversial, even those small changes. No one, I think, is going to be up in arms about, oh, it's not theologically like accurate or something like that. And I think it's, definitely has all of the standard bits that we'd want of like a good, like kind of life transformation story. It obviously has a good kind of budget and scene work and all of this like really cool cinema stuff. And I think from a plot wise, I think it's certainly, now it goes to show, being a person that grew up in the church around Christian stuff, never heard of this movie until like you suggested it, Pat. So I don't think it has an enduring legacy compared to some others, and I think maybe that's because even though on the surface it has a lot of the right stuff, I think maybe it just doesn't have either emotional resonance, or it is also just sort of that old now that it just sort of people run up against it's kind of old and looks and feels kind of old, right?
Yep.
Where within 2 decades you have movies that may start feeling, and maybe we'll see in 20 years if we're like, oh, remember those 80s movies? And everyone's like, man, I can't watch a movie from the 80s. It's too old. I don't think,
I'm trying to think like, I went to Sunday school and I do remember being shown the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, this does
That
not
one's-
have the mass appeal of that for sure.
No.
Sure.
Or Ben-Hur.
Yeah. Which is actually the outcome of this movie for me is I really want to go watch Ben-Hur.
Oh, make sure you have a good TV because it's if you can get it in 4K, it's unbelievably good looking.
Okay, cool. I'll have to look it up, see if I can find it.
Well, that's it for the notes.
Okay.
I have nothing else to add except give our ratings.
All right.
Nathan, do you want to go first as the guest?
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. First, last, middle. It's all good with me. So, again, went in to this movie maybe more for the novelty of like, an old 50s biblical epic. I didn't even know the context behind CinemaScope and widescreen. I think, as we've had this discussion, definitely can echo all of the things about, oh, it looks really cool, and look at all this interesting kind of production history. And certainly, I think visually has just really cool stuff, costumes, art design, or art direction, has all that good stuff, the things it won Oscars for. But as a movie that is like, oh, is this something that I want to come back to, right? That's one of my biggest things. How good of a movie is this, something that I want to come back to, or I think people need to watch, even if it's not something I'm going to come back to. Is it a movie I think people need to watch? And I don't think I see that with this movie. I think it's totally fine. It's very inoffensive. It really has nothing that I think is bad, and I didn't have a problem watching it, but it doesn't come across. I don't come out of this movie going, man, The Robe. I am so excited about that movie. That was so entertaining, right? In terms of that. So I think it's very middle of the road for me, and it's coming in actually at about a C, I think. And that's, a lot more because of, I think, its production. It's there because it's passing, right? It's passing, it's fine, has good enough performances, has good enough stuff. Maybe there's an argument that it should be a C+ because, man, that art direction and sets are pretty cool. But I think that's right about it for me.
See,
yeah.
Anton, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I having seen this film again, I don't necessarily put it in the classic category. I think in terms of historical fiction, the special biblical elements and incorporation into the storyline I've seen more effectively in other films that are classics. I just mentioned the Ten Commandments, but I think that what really endures with this film is its influence on the production side of things. So I think Nathan made a really good point. The influence of CinemaScope, the use of lighting, the color. I think that those elements are really, really stand out. And I think it just reminds me of just the wonder that was this era of film. And I always still really enjoy that. So I think even if it is a more fair to say middle of the pack film from my perspective of enjoyment factor, I think the production factor is still something to marvel at, and it's done really well. And you can see it on screen. And I think that anyone that watches film or likes to call themselves a fan of film absolutely should see this, just because it has such an important footnote in history. I think Richard Burton really does he really does push things for me in terms of bringing this outside of just average category. I really love his performance. I definitely would have thought he was much older than 27. And hey, he also smoked 5 packs a day on set, which is not an exaggeration. And I really just wanted to mention that just because I had no idea where else to mention it in the episode.
Yeah.
But that is to say, I think this movie was just fine. Like, pretty good performances. Some things come off a little cheesy, but this is the golden age of Hollywood. There's much worse, but this isn't even in that category. This is, I'd say, a pretty good film. I go ahead and give this one a C+.
I'm going to pause and just say that doesn't quite sound like C+. Sounds like it should be a little bit higher, but that's fine.
No, I think you're fair, Anton.
Yeah.
I agree with pretty much everything you both have said already. I thought this was an interesting throwback to watch. This was a time when extravagant biblical epics were very much a part of mainstream Hollywood and could even get nominated for Best Picture. We didn't really talk about how this was nominated for Best Picture. I can see why it was. Anton, I think this was a very contemporary example of stuff that we actually see today in the Academy Awards, which was this didn't get great reviews, but it was a huge box office success and the Academy honored it. We see that now. Ben-Hur is probably the champ of these things, right? I mean, the Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur are like the best examples of what these films could be. Box office juggernauts, awards, darlings. Those two films have endured much greater over the years than The Robe. By the way, I do have to remind us, like, The Robe is just such a dumb title. It just doesn't, I don't know. They could have done better here. I don't know what they could have called it, but
It sounds like it could have been a joke film that Kramer was pitching on Seinfeld.
It's going to be about Jesus's robe. What are you going to call it? The Robe. I was trying to ask myself, because I haven't read the book, could this have been better given the source material? I don't know. Given the constraints of the time, I thought there were some things that they could have done better here in regards to the historical context. This is certainly no Ben-Hur. It's lavish and heavy-handed, and I thought it dragged in a couple parts, but for the most part, it's a well-paced film. I think the performances for the most part are good. There are some questionable ones. You can say Jay Robinson is good or bad. I still don't know. I wanted to like this more than I think I did based on the subject matter alone. Now, having said that, there are some very good performances. I really do like Richard Burton. Jay Robinson is entertaining. There are some other supporting performances that we pointed out. It is well made. There are some very dramatic scenes that I think work well. I don't think this is some forgotten classic, though. I don't think this is anything special. There's nothing bad in here, though. The cinemascope of it all and the art direction of it all, it's a very good-looking film. It was a very interesting film to watch and explore and discuss. I'm right with you, Nathan, at a C. I think it's okay.
Yeah, I think it's okay. Look at that. Consensus.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Gene Simmons would be found later in a different film, Detroit Rock City.
Did she look as good in that as she does here?
Kept the same makeup.
Okay. We're just going to leave that there. Nathan, it is always a pleasure having you on.
It's always a pleasure being here, guys.
Especially when you volunteer for films like this, where you're under duress, according to you.
Come on the pod.
Come on the pod. Nobody made you.
Let me look at the list to see the next one that you're on, Nathan. It's Caligula. Okay.
Oh gosh. Which version?
No.
The super unrated version.
That's good. I'm not gonna be. I'm sick that day.
Try explaining that to your wife. I need to watch Caligula.
I don't want to watch the movie, but the production is absolutely fascinating.
Have you seen it?
I have, but I don't want to watch it again.
No. Well, that is it for The Robe. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on Why Wasn't It Better?